G'day guys! Probably the #1 video that's been requested by you in the comments section below is an Iron Warriors Masterclass. I know I've been dragging my feet a little bit with this one, but that ends today. We are going to be giving you a Iron Warriors Masterclass, a deep dive in all of the different Warlord traits, stratagems, and spicy combos that you can achieve with this Chaos Legion. This is going to round out our 9th edition Chaos Legions Masterclass, and I couldn't think of a better Legion to end it with than the Iron Warriors. So with that being said, let's get stuck into the video.
Welcome to the Black God.
Alrighty, before we get started talking about all of the different combos, the Legion trait, all of these sorts of things, what we need to talk about is the pros and cons for the Iron Warriors and why you might choose to run Iron Warriors over any of the other Legions. Now, the Chaos Space Marine Codex does some things exceptionally well and some things not so well. One of the things that it does very, very, very well is create Death Stars or Anvils, big units that have layered buffs on them that are just impossible to kill. And of all of the legions, Iron Warriors does this the best. They have a number of different combos that are unique to them that make it so that their units are really, really hard to shift. In addition, Iron Warriors have some really, really good ranged damage output, which is one of the areas that the Chaos Space Marine Codex traditionally is quite lacking. So this combination of being able to make the most hard to kill units, on top of being able to deal additional damage at range compared to other legions, makes Iron Warriors a very interesting and powerful Legion selection. One of the areas where Iron Warriors lack, however, is in their combat damage. It's not quite as high as some of the other Legions, and also in some of their secondary play. They don't have some of the same options available to them that other Legions do. So it's a bit of a trade-off, whether you want something that's a melee powerhouse or whether you want something that's going to be really good at scoring objectives. If that's the case, then Iron Warriors may not be for you. However, if you're interested in having an army that's really, really hard to shift off the table and an army that is able to do additional damage at range as well as in melee, then Iron Warriors is an absolute steal. So with that being said, let's talk about their Legion trait first. Alright, their Legion trait is Iron Within, Iron Without. Each time a model with this trait makes an attack, the target does not receive the benefits of cover against the attack. And each time an attack is allocated to a model with this trait, if that attack has an armor penetration characteristic of 1 or 2, the armor penetration characteristic of that attack is worsened by 1. Alright, so straight out the gate, there's a few really important things to note here. One is that your opponent does not receive the benefits of cover. This includes light cover and dense cover. So if you're shooting through a forest, you don't have to suffer that -1 to hit. And if your opponent's in light cover, they're not going to get that +1 to their saving throws. This makes the shooting damage output of the Iron Warriors significantly higher, particularly in an era where Armor of Contempt is no longer a part of the game. It means that your opponents are getting significantly less saves than they would probably be used to receiving, which means the damage you're going to do to them is much higher than what they would likely expect you to do. And that's going to allow you to really pull the levers of power in the game. The other thing here is that you've essentially retained Armor of Contempt to a degree, which is another thing where you're going to be able to pull those levers of expectation. Your opponent is going to be used to dealing a certain amount of damage, and you're going to be able to slow that down by reducing the armor penetration characteristic of incoming attacks by 1, provided they are AP 1 and 2. Now, this is something that was changed in the previous data slate because it didn't want to stack with Armor of Contempt. However, now, a lot of people have started bringing more AP1 and AP2 weapons in their army because Armor of Contempt is gone. This is something that plays heavily into the Iron Warriors' favor. Alright, now let's talk about the Iron Warriors' specific secondary objective. This is not their biggest strength, but it is something that you'll want to know about if you're planning to play with Iron Warriors. Alright, it is in Shadow Operations, so it will be competing with Raise the Banners High and Retrieve Battlefield Data. It is called Masters of Demolition. If you select this objective, during the resolve pre-battle abilities step of the mission, your opponent must set up 3 objective markers anywhere on the battlefield that are on ground level, not within 9 inches of each other, and not within 6 inches of any battlefield edge. These objectives cannot be set up on terrain features with the unstable position trait, and no more than one of them can be set up within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. If it is impossible to set up an objective marker, it is not set up. Each represents a demolition site, but does not count as an objective marker for any rules purposes other than for this objective. Iron Warriors units from your army can attempt the following action. So the action is called Total Demolition. One Iron Warriors infantry unit, excluding character units from your army, can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase if it's within range of a demolition site objective marker that you control. This action is completed at the end of your turn, provided the unit performing it is still within range of the same objective marker. If completed, that objective marker is said to be demolished by your army and is removed from the battlefield. At the end of the battle, score 4 victory points for each demolition site objective marker that was demolished by your army. Score an additional 4 victory points if a demolition site objective marker that was within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone was demolished by your army. Alright, so that's a lot of words, but essentially what's going to happen is your opponent's going to lay down 3 objective markers, and then your job is to get infantry units onto those objective markers, start the action. That action is going to complete at the end of your turn, and if you do, that marker is removed, that is said to be destroyed, and that's worth 4 victory points. There's a few challenges here. One of them is that you can only do it with 1 unit per turn, so you can only really destroy 1 of these demolition sites per turn. And you have to control it in order to do so. So if you go into an objective marker but your opponent's already on it, you can't control it, and therefore you can't steal it from them. So if Iron Warriors were planning to do this, they need to lean heavily into objective secured models that are able to go in and control that objective marker and take it away. If you don't have a lot of objective secured models in your army, you're going to find this mission very, very difficult to do. Further to this, one of the challenges you will find is that because your opponent gets to place the objective markers, they're going to place them in areas where you can't simultaneously control one of the primary objective markers and your demolition marker. And that's going to make it very difficult for you to achieve both things. And generally speaking, you're going to be able to focus on primary, because primary is a way that not only can you score yourself points, but you can deny your opponent points. So controlling the primary is more important than it will be to control these arbitrary objective markers that are in the middle of nowhere. So generally speaking, this is a secondary objective that you are likely going to want to avoid. However, there are some situations where this will be good, and it depends on what elements you build into your list as to whether or not you want to chase down this. I think it's one of those things where you have to build in specific parts of your list designed to hunt this objective down, and provided you can do that in such a way that you're not sacrificing other things, then this is all good. It's worth noting that Iron Warriors do have a way of giving objective secured 2 units. So you could get Terminators with objective secured in Iron Warriors, which is going to make this objective much, much easier to secure. So with that being said, in general, I'd probably give this a B, maybe a B+, but often you're going to want to take Banners instead, because Banners is an A+ objective. You're going to get 5 to 10 victory points every single game if you play Banners well, whereas this, you're going to get an optimistic, 8 to 12, depending on, how well you go with it, but you're going to be sacrificing primary likely in the process. So generally speaking, I think this is something that you're going to want to avoid. It will depend on your matchup and depend on your list how. Alright, now let's have a look at the Iron Warriors Warlord traits. There's some really, really spicy ones in here. Some really strong parts of this legion come from their Warlord traits. So let's dig through them, shall we? Alright, the first one is called Siege Lord. In your command phase, select one friendly Iron Warriors core or Iron Warriors vehicle unit within 6 inches of your Warlord. Until the start of your next command phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack against an enemy vehicle or building, if the attack is made with a weapon with a strength characteristic of 7 or more, add 1 to the damage characteristic of that attack. Alright, so there's a few criteria there. Basically, you need to be within 6 inches of your Warlord at the start of the command phase, so this isn't something that you can move into that range and then do, or move your Warlord up and then give to somebody. It's in command phase, so you have to already be there. That's a challenge. And you also have to have a core or vehicle keyword and a strength characteristic of a certain value. So there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get this, However, getting that +1 damage is very, very spicy, and there's some really interesting ways that you can make this very, very powerful that we'll talk about later. Alright, next we have Demon Smith. In your command phase, select one friendly Iron Warriors Demon Engine, Iron Warriors Cult of Destruction, Iron Warriors Machine Spirit unit within 6 inches of the Warlord. Until the start of your next command phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll. Alright, so that's a pretty broad range of units, and getting a sneaky +1 to hit is always welcome and is always very powerful. However, I'm not entirely sure that this is one of the Warlord traits that you're going to want, because there's a lot of CP that Iron Warriors are going to want to use, so you really need to be pretty specific about what Warlords you take, what Warlord traits you take, and why. And this is one where it's really just going to let you do a little bit more damage on a unit. I'm not entirely sure I'm sold on this one. It's spicy, it's cool, but I think there's other ones that are better. Alright, next we have Unyielding Metal. Add 1 to the toughness characteristic of your Warlord, and each time this Warlord would lose a wound, roll a d6. On a 5+, that wound is not lost. This one for me is a standout. This is one of my favorite Iron Warriors Warlord traits. You put this on a Disco Lord, a Lord Discordant, and he goes in and he is so hard to kill. He becomes toughness 8, he becomes 5-up feel no pain essentially against incoming attacks. This makes him really hard to put down, particularly when paired with some of the stratagems that Iron Warriors have that they can put on a Lord Discordant. So this one is one that I would almost consider an auto-include in Iron Warriors lists. Alright, this next one's called Bastion and is also an auto-include. In your command phase, select one friendly Iron Warriors core unit within 6 inches of the Warlord until the start of your next command phase. Each time an enemy unit declares a charge against that unit, if it is not within engagement range of enemy units, it can either hold steady or set to defend, and this unit has the objective secured ability. If a model already has this ability, it counts as one additional model when determining control of the objective marker. Alright, so it's worth noting that this is a select a unit in the command phase, so you can put this on a unit and then send it out, and it brings that objective secured with it, as opposed to the Black Legion's Cloak of Conquest, which is an aura, so you have to remain within that aura in order to keep that objective secured. This is really good because it means that you can put that aura on, say, a Terminator unit, and then you can send that Terminator unit out to charge and fight something and take objectives and string out across the board, and they retain that objective secured until your next command phase. It's also particularly interesting on a Terminator unit because when they set to defend, they're now overwatching on a 5+ with all those bolters. That's a really, really spicy damage output, and it makes them really terrifying to charge. And realistically, when you've got that big Terminator unit, which we're going to go through how to make that unkillable in a moment, you have this big stretched out Terminator unit that's really, really hard to kill. You can't shoot it down. You can't just walk onto objectives and take it from them because they've got objectives secured. And if you try to charge them and engage in combat, they're going to overwatch you on a 5+, do massive damage, and then they're going to do a decent amount of damage in melee as well. This is a really, really powerful Warlord trait, and I think it is a must-take in an Iron Warriors army. Next, we have Architect of Destruction. In your command phase, you can select a friendly Iron Warriors core Iron Warriors vehicle unit within 6 inches of the Warlord until the start of your next command phase. Each time a model in that unit makes an attack, if your army is engaged in wanton massacre or wanton slaughter, that unit is considered to be engaged in wanton destruction instead. Alright, this is kind of cool, but the problem is wanton destruction is probably the worst of the 3 wantons. This is the one where you get it for heavy and rapid fire weapons. You get it for rapid fire weapons in Massacre anyway, and generally speaking, there's not a massive number of heavy weapons in the Chaos Space Marine arsenal. That being said, if you are bringing demon engines like Forge Fiends, you can get a lot of heavy weapons that way. There is some utility to it if you build your list around it. However, given that we've already got 2 Warlord traits that are pretty much an auto-include, I think this is one that you'll leave on the shelf. Alright, and last but not least, we have Implacable Taskmaster. While a friendly Iron Warriors core unit is within 6 inches of the Warlord, each time it is selected to shoot, if that unit made a normal move in your previous movement phase, then until its shooting attacks have been resolved, it counts as having remained stationary. So the idea here is that you're going to be able to move up and shoot with heavy weapons with no penalty. There's some interesting stuff there, but once again, this probably is one of the lesser powerful Warlord traits, given that we have the ability to give objectives secured, we have the ability to become practically unkillable on a Disco Lord. There's a lot of really powerful ones in there, and unfortunately, I think this one just doesn't stack up in comparison. Alrighty, so that rounds it out for the Warlord traits. There's a couple of really powerful ones in there, but now let's talk about the relics, and let's talk about how you can combine these relics with these Warlord traits to create really, really powerful characters, both in the way that they can buff units and also become tanks in their own right. Alright, the first relic is called Axe of the Forge Master. Model with a Power Axe, Exalted Axe, Axe of Dismemberment, or Demonic Axe only. This relic replaces the weapon and has the following profile. It's basically Strength plus 3, AP 3, 2 damage, and each time an attack is made with this weapon on an unmodified wound roll of a 6, the target suffers a mortal wound in addition to normal damage. If the target is a vehicle, it suffers 3 mortal wounds in addition to the normal damage. This is cute, this is powerful, this is a really strong weapon. However, I am generally speaking against giving upgraded weapons to characters and units in armies because generally speaking, your characters are already either really powerful beatsticks without the relic, or they're there to serve the purposes of buffing character or some kind of aura providing character that buffs up units, and the units themselves have all the powerful weapons. So it's very rare that you'll see me recommend a relic weapon, and this is definitely one of the examples of one that you don't want to be wasting the command points on. Alright, next we have the Siegebreaker Mace. Iron Warriors model only with a Power Maul, Thunderhammer, a Cursed Crozius, a Cursed Weapon only. This relic replaces that weapon and has the following profile. Siegebreaker Mace. Each time the bearer is selected to fight, it makes one additional attack using the weapon's smash profile. All other attacks made with this weapon must be made using the weapon's swing profile. So its swing profile is Strength plus 2, neg 2, 2 damage, and its smash profile is times 2, AP3, D3 plus 3 damage. Alright, so this sounds pretty crazy on face value. D3 plus 3 damage on a strength times 2 weapon means that you're going to be absolutely pummeling the things that you hit. However, you only get to make one attack with that weapon. There's every chance that you'll miss. There's every chance that you'll fail to wound. And then there's also every chance that your opponent's going to have an invulnerable save or something like that and pass it. So it's realistically, it's not that amazing. And like I said previously, relic weapons are generally ill-advised because your character's generally going to be doing decent damage already anyway, and you're better off having a relic that's going to provide a buff to a unit that gets many models getting a benefit than spending that command point to buff one model and giving him a benefit. Next we have the Flesh Metal Exoskeleton. So this is an Iron Warriors infantry model only. Each time an attack is allocated to the bearer, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack to a minimum of 1. And each time an enemy unit shoots or fights after making its attacks, if the bearer lost any wounds as a result of those attacks but was not destroyed, on a 4+, the bearer regains up to D3 wounds as a result of those attacks. This is actually pretty cool. Neg 1 damage and the ability to regain wounds, especially if you put this on, say, a Terminator Sorcerer, that makes him a real tank. It means that people are going to really struggle to get through the 6 wound characteristic of that Sorcerer. And it also means that if they do any damage to you, you're going to be regaining those wounds, healing yourself back up. This is particularly interesting if you're going to go for the Warp Ritual play, where you're going to get a Terminator, you're going to put him in the center of the table, and then try to use Warp Ritual repeatedly. Because when you do that, your opponent's going to try to kill that Sorcerer. And being able to go, cool, I'm neg 1 damage, I'm a Terminator armor, I'm in cover, I'm an Iron Warrior, so I'm reducing the incoming AP of an attack by 1, and I'm regenerating wounds every time you fail to kill me. That makes this Terminator Sorcerer an absolute pain in the ass to kill, and that means that you can pretty reliably go for that Warp Ritual and know that you're going to be there for the 3 turns required to score those victory points. So I do really like this one. I'm not entirely sure that I would take it just because it is competing with some other really powerful stuff, and command points are so critical to the way that Iron Warriors are going to play, but it's definitely one that I wouldn't look the other way if somebody did take it. I think it's a very, very viable relic. Next, we have the Cranium Malevolus. This is an Iron Warriors model only, and it can be given to a Cultist model. The bearer has the following ability. Cranium Malevolus. At the start of your shooting phase, roll 1d6 for each enemy vehicle unit within 9 inches of the bearer. On a 4 to 5, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. On a 6, they suffer 3 mortal wounds. This one's pretty cool. Unfortunately, it's only really going to come up against heavy vehicle opponents. Like, it'll be really powerful into things like Knights, things like Guard, you know, maybe even Tau if they're bringing lots of Hammerheads and lots of Devilfish and lots of Skyrays. But unfortunately, this is not a very vehicle-heavy meta. You've got lots of elite armies running around with infantry. You've got Space Marines running around with a ton of infantry. You've got, you know, Tyranids. You've got all these different Monster Mash style lists. Vehicles aren't a particularly common thing in the top end of the competitive meta. And unfortunately, a relic that targets vehicles isn't necessarily always going to yield what you need it to, and therefore it's not worth spending the command point in your list to bring it to every game. Alright, next we have Insidium. Iron Warrior's infantry model only, excluding demon models. The bearer gains the demon and demonkin keywords, and you can add one to the strength, toughness, and wounds characteristic of the bearer. Alright, this one's interesting, and it does compete with the previous armor upgrade, where you got to halve incoming damage. So halving incoming damage compared to gaining additional wounds and toughness is an interesting little paradigm there. I would probably go with the previous relic though. This one is really cool in that you do gain the demon and demonkin keywords, so if there's some different stratagems that you're planning to utilize and you want to synergize that way, this has some options, and we'll go through the stratagems shortly and talk about what those options are. However, I would be taking the neg 1 damage trait and regenerate wounds, sorry, not trait, relic, instead. Alright, next we have Spite Spitter. Iron Warrior's model with a combi bolter, combi flamer, combi melter, combi plasma only. This weapon replaces the combi bolter or the bolt gun profile of a combi flamer, combi melter, or combi plasma. Note that this weapon still keeps any of its other profiles, and you can select which of its profiles to make attacks with as normal, as specified in the weapon's profile. If this relic replaces a combi bolter, it has the combi bolter profile below. Otherwise, its bolt gun profile is replaced with the combi weapon profile below. Okay, so Spite Spitter. So if it's a combi bolter, it becomes a 30-inch range, rapid fire 2, strength 5, neg 3, 2 damage shots. Or if you're a combi weapon, you replace the bolter profile with a 30-inch range, rapid fire 1, strength 5, AP 3, 2 damage weapon. Alright, so that's a lot of words to basically say that if you have a combi weapon, the bolter component of that weapon gains strength, AP, range, and damage, which is a lot of things to improve, but you're improving on something that's already quite lackluster. And like I've said a million times before, when it comes to upgrading weapons, it's very rarely a good choice. And that goes twice as hard for ranged weapons. Upgrading pistols and combi bolters and those sorts of things is almost never a good idea. Alright, and last but absolutely not least, we have the Techno-Venomous Mechatendrils. So this is an Iron Warrior's Warpsmith only. Each time the bearer repairs a model using its Master of Mechanisms ability, that model regains up to 3 lost wounds instead of D3. And each time the bearer makes an attack with its Mechatendrils, if a hit is scored, the target suffers 1 mortal wound and the attack sequence ends. Alright, now this one is very, very interesting in particular builds specifically. So being able to repair something to just regain 3 wounds, especially when you have demon engines that are regaining 1 wound already, means that you're going to be regenerating 4 wounds per turn, making your vehicles really hard to kill. And Iron Warriors have some really spicy tricks on making their vehicles even harder to kill. So being able to regenerate something that's already really hard to kill is super fucking powerful and really annoying for your opponent to have to deal with. Further to that, this guy going in and every single hit is just a mortal wound, attack sequence ends, makes him really, really powerful in melee, especially when going into things like Dark Angels, Terminators, and stuff like that, where they're all like, oh, we're transhuman, and we've got invulnerable saves, and we've got storm shields, so we've got 1-up saves, and this guy just goes in and goes, I don't give a fuck, and he just stabs him with all of his tendrils, and does up to 10 mortal wounds on the charge. This guy's really, really powerful, and you can do some really interesting stuff buffing him up and sending him in, or sitting back and regenerating your vehicle. So there's a Iron Warriors Warpsmith build that's really, really interesting as well. Alright, now that we've gone through all of the Warlord traits and all of the relics, and we've talked about some of the different character builds that you can make, I think the main standouts for me are that you're going to have either a Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, and you're going to give him the ability to have +1 damage and a 5-up Feel No Pain, and you're going to send him in and he's going to be very hard to kill. Or you're going to take a Sorcerer Lord, and you're going to give him neg 1 incoming damage, the ability to regenerate wounds, and he's going to go in and do your Warp Ritual. Or you're going to do the Warpsmith with the Mechatendrils, and he's going to go in and do massive amounts of mortal wounds whilst buffing up your vehicles. They're the 3 potential builds, and of those 3, you're also going to want at least one of them to have the ability to give objective secured off to your friendly units nearby, so that you're buffing up units whilst repairing units whilst doing damage, or you're buffing up units whilst securing Psychic Ritual, or you're buffing up units whilst going in and being a real pain in the ass to kill. They're the three directions that I think Iron Warriors players want to take their characters. But now that we've talked about the characters, let's have a look at the various stratagems that are uniquely available to the Iron Warriors, and then let's dig out the real power that's within these stratagems. Alright, so first up we have Bitter Enmity, however the fuck you pronounce it. 1 CP, use this stratagem at the start of the fight phase when an Iron Warriors unit from your army is selected to fight. Until the end of the phase, each time a Heretic Astartes model in that unit makes an attack against an Imperial Fists unit or against the successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, you can reroll the hit roll and you can reroll the wound roll. Alright, so this is a stratagem that you'll almost never use because unfortunately Imperial Fists and their successors are not very popular. However, if you do get into a game where you happen to be up against Imperial Fists, you're going to use this at least 5 times in the game because 1 CP to reroll all hits and wounds is insane. So this is one that you're definitely going to want to remember, but you're probably very rarely going to use them. If the meta shifted in such a way that Imperial Fists became popular, yes, you would use it. However, given that 10th edition's right around the corner, the meta's not likely to shift, and by the time it does shift, we're going to have a whole new set of stratagems available to us, and this won't matter anymore. So yeah, keep it in mind for the next couple months, but you probably won't use it. Next we have Tank Destroyers, 1 command point. Use this stratagem in your shooting phase or the fight phase. Select 1 enemy vehicle unit. Until the end of that phase, each time an Iron Warriors Heretic Astartes model makes an attack against that enemy unit, an unmodified hit roll of 6 automatically wounds the target. Being able to automatically wound things on a 6 is really, really good. We've seen this with Votan, we've seen this with the Imperial Guard, we've seen this across many factions now. Being able to auto wound on a 6 is very, very powerful. Unfortunately, this is limited to enemy vehicles. However, it is pretty interesting that you get to pick that unit and then everything that shoots at it is going to be auto wounding on 6s. And if you've got a ton of bolters in your army and they've got a bunch of T8 vehicles, being able to go, oh cool, I only wound you on a 6, but I'm going to hit you on a 6 and automatically wound, that's huge. That's a huge buff in your damage output and makes this a stratagem that you're definitely going to want to keep in mind for those matchups where you're going into lots of vehicles, or your opponent has one particularly tough vehicle, like say a Votan Land Fortress, that you really need to kill. Alright, next we have Dour Duty. So this is 2/1 CP. Use this stratagem in any phase when an Iron Warriors Core Infantry or Iron Warriors Demonkin unit is selected as the target of an attack. Until the end of the phase, each time an attack is allocated to a Heretic Astartes model in that unit, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of the attack to a minimum of 1. If that unit has a power rating of 10 or more, the stratagem costs 2 CP, otherwise it costs 1 CP. Alright, this is one of the stratagems that in my opinion defines the Iron Warriors and makes them really, really powerful. And the reason that is there's twofold. One, you can use this on that big 10-man Terminator unit that you've got in your army that's going to have all kinds of buffs. You're going to have the standard Illusory Supplication, you're going to be putting Mutated Invigoration to make them toughness 5, they're going to have the Black Rune of Damnation on them to make them neg 1 to be wounded, so now your opponent can only hit you on a 4+, they can't reroll to hit against you. You're going to be getting 5 up Feel No Pain from Delightful Agonies, you're going to be toughness 5 with neg 1 to wound, and then on top of all of that, you're going to be neg 1 damage, so their incoming attacks are being reduced by 1. That makes this unit absolutely untouchable. You know, there's a lot of people out there that one of the ways that they deal with the Chaos Space Marine Terminators is they hit you with 3 damage attacks, hoping that each attack that gets through is going to kill one of your Terminators. Whereas if you go, cool, I'm actually neg 1 damage, that means that 2 damage attacks are half as efficient against you, 3 damage attacks are effectively half as efficient because instead of each shot getting through and killing a Terminator, they're going to need to get 2 shots through to kill a Terminator. And even 4 damage attacks. A 4 damage attack hits you, you reduce the damage by 1, so it becomes 3. Then you've got 3 Delightful Agony saves, so you're likely to make one of those. So it's going to mean that essentially it's going to take 2 successful wounds from a 4 damage attack to kill one of your Terminators. And when they're going to get neg 1 to wound, they're hitting you on toughness 5, they're only hitting you on 4s with no rerolls, it becomes just ridiculously hard for them to die. So people are just going to, as soon as you have this, they're just going to ignore your Terminators. They're not even going to bother trying to kill you because you tell them at the start of the game, if you target me, I can reactively become -1 damage. And the beautiful thing is you actually never have to use the strat. You tell your opponent that you can use it, and they're not going to bother targeting you because they're not going to be like, well, why target it? They're just going to use the strat, and now I'm going to do no damage. And as a result, their entire game plan is going to revolve around avoiding your Terminators instead of dealing with it. And when you create that situation, you can put your Terminators up into the middle of the table, and your opponent has no option. They're just going to ignore them. They're just going to have to. They've got no choice. And as a result, you control the center of the table all game long. And then basically you build elements into your list so that the rest of your army can fight the flanks and push your opponent back so that you control the table. And that's how you win games with Iron Warriors. All right, next we have Cold-Hearted Malignity. 1 CP. Use this stratagem at the start of any phase. Select one Iron Warriors core unit from your army that is below half strength. Until the end of the battle, they automatically pass morale checks, and each time my model in the unit makes an attack, add 1 to the attack's hit roll. Alright, this is actually pretty spicy. The ignoring morale thing is kind of irrelevant because generally speaking, by the time you're below half strength, you're going to be at a low model count, and from that point onwards, you're likely to not require morale checks, because if you go from 10 models down to 5, then in the next turn, you can now ignore morale checks, but if they kill 1 or 2 models, that's not going to be enough to trigger a morale check. And if they kill 4 or 5, they're effectively killing the unit, so no morale check. So either way, the morale check part isn't that relevant. But for 1 CP to be able to just go, cool, you've finally killed my Terminators down to 5 men left. So now I'm at half strength. So you go, cool, 1 CP to get +1 to hit. And then you start using your Master of Possessions to resurrect those Terminators back. And now you've got this bigger unit of Terminators with +1 to hit just baked in for the rest of the game. That's really powerful. It is worth noting on this one that you use it at the start of any phase. So if in your opponent's turn, they shoot you down to being below half strength, you can use that 1 CP at the start of that morale phase to mean that you automatically pass those morale checks. So if you have a unit of 10 Terminators and somehow your opponent just goes in and kills like 6 of them in one volley, which can happen, they kill 6 of your Terminators, cool. That would normally mean that you're going to have to take a morale check, you're going to have to spend 2 CP to auto-pass that morale check, or you're going to have to trust the dice. But you could potentially lose it, which would mean you would lose another one, and then you would lose a bunch to your attrition test. You can just spend the 1 CP on this and go, cool, I'm not going to fail that morale check, and going forward, I'm going to have that +1 to hit. All right, next we have Methodical Annihilation. 1 CP, use this stratagem in your shooting phase when an Iron Warriors unit is selected to shoot. It's till the end of the phase. When resolving that unit's attacks, you can re-roll 1 damage roll. Each time a model in that unit makes an attack with a weapon with the blast ability, for the purposes of determining how many shots are made with that weapon, double the number of models in the target unit. And if the unit is a vehicle, it can make attacks with blast weapons against units within engagement range. However, if it does so, each time it makes an attack with a blast weapon this phase, an unmodified hit roll of 1, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound after all attacks have been resolved. This is pretty cool on a Forge Fiend if you've got a whole ton of blast weapons, because you can go, cool, that unit over there, I'm going to make it count as double the number of models, which means I'm going to get full shots on my blast weapon. And then if your opponent charges into you and you're like, cool, well, I'm going to shoot you in combat with my blast weapons, making your Forge Fiends really difficult to get into combat with. So I think the Iron Warriors Forge Fiends really love it with this stratagem. Not to mention the fact that you can heal them up and you can do all kinds of other crazy things with demon engines in an Iron Warriors army. Next we have Unholy Vigor. So this is either 3 or 2 CP. Use the stratagem in any phase when an Iron Warriors Machine Spirit or Iron Warriors Demon Engine unit from your army is selected as the target of an attack. Until the end of the phase, each time an attack is made against that unit, subtract 1 from the attack's wound roll. If that unit has a Titanic keyword, it's 3 CP, otherwise it's 2. Alright, so this is one of the things that combos really well with that Lord Discordant that we were talking about earlier. If you give that Lord Discordant the ability to have the toughness 8 and the 5-up feel no pain, and then you send him in, and then on top of that, you go, oh, by the way, I'm also able to reactively make you neg1 to wound. That's really, really powerful. This is also really, really powerful on things like a toughness 9 Land Raider, or on things like a Khorne Lord of Skulls. Now, granted, on the Khorne Lord of Skulls, it's going to cost a lot more CP, but keeping those things alive when they would otherwise die is a huge swing. Being able to go, cool, they would have killed that Lord of Skulls, but instead I'm going to spend 3 CP and now keep it alive. You're essentially spending 3 CP to get an entire another turn out of this, really expensive, powerful unit, and sometimes that is going to be worth it. You might have to do some accountants level maths to figure out whether or not it's going to be worth it on the day when your opponent's allocating attacks. You have to do it, but again, kind of like the -1 damage strat that I talked about earlier, you don't necessarily have to use this. You can tell your opponent, I have 3 CP there. If you target me, I'm going to make myself neg1 to wound, and your shots are going to do nothing. When you tell your opponent that, they're going to go, oh, fuck, good point, and they're going to shoot something else instead. And that means that your Lord of Skulls is likely to stay alive anyway, even though you don't spend the command points on the stratagem. So just having this in the pocket and having the command points available to use it is going to be really powerful. And that sort of leads into a point that I want to make at this stage where I think Iron Warriors players need to play super conservatively with their command points. They need to make sure that they always have 2 or 3 command points available to them so that they can threaten to use these strats. They can say, oh, don't shoot my Terminators or I'm going to make you neg 1 damage. You know, don't shoot my Lord of Skulls or I'm going to make you neg 1 to wound. And if you have the command points there, your opponent will not want to call your bluff. They're going to be like, you know what, I don't want to mess with that. And they're going to shoot other things instead. They're going to engage in combat with other things instead. And as a result, you'll be able to bully them around the table and dictate their decisions, which is a really, really powerful way of controlling the flow of the game. All right, next we have Cannon Fodder, 2 command points. Use this stratagem at the start of your opponent's shooting phase. Select 1 Iron Warriors infantry unit from your army, then select 1 friendly Iron Warriors cultist unit wholly within 6 inches of that unit. Until the end of the phase, enemy models cannot target the Iron Warriors infantry unit that the Iron Warriors cultist unit is closer eligible target. This is a pretty cool way of keeping your precious infantry units alive if your opponent gets the alpha strike on you. So you can go, cool, I'm going to deploy my Terminators in the open, and then I'm going to deploy cultists in front, and now your opponent can't, if they get first turn, target those Terminators because the cultist unit's in front and they're going to go cannon fodder. The downside to this is often your opponent's just going to shoot out the cultists first and then target your big precious unit. So this is something that can be used in certain situations, and it can be a really interesting way of keeping things alive. However, it's not always going to be effective. I actually think one of the best uses for this is if you've got, say, a unit of legionaries on an objective and you put your cannon fodder cultists in front, and now it's 2 relatively small, relatively ineffectual units that your opponent is probably not going to be likely able to deal with because they're going to be too busy dealing with your demon engines running up the field and your Terminators that are blowing them up and all this other stuff that's happening, that they're not going to be able to commit considerable firepower downrange, which means if they do try to target you, you can just cannon fodder, and now they have to kill through all your cultists and all of your legionaries in a specific order that might not be suitable for them. So it's definitely one worth considering. However, I don't think this is necessarily one that you're going to build your game plan around, but it's definitely one you want to factor in as those sort of, niche situations may arise. All right, next we have Spiteful Endurance, 1 CP. Use this stratagem in any phase when an Iron Warriors Heretic Astartes model from your army would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound. Until the end of the phase, each time that model or any other Heretic Astartes model in that unit would lose a wound as a result of a mortal wound, roll a d6. On a 5+, that wound is not lost. So you're essentially getting a 5-up, feel no pain save against mortal wounds. This is really, really cool on your Terminator unit if you fail Delightful Agonies. Often, one of the best ways that your people are going to deal with this Iron Warriors Terminator unit that's got the ability to go neg 1 damage, it's got the ability to go neg 1 to wound with toughness 5, with trans hitman, so you can only ever hit it on 4s. Really, really hard unit to kill. One of the best ways to deal with it is through psychic damage and through mortal wounds. However, you're able to just go, cool, no thanks, I'm going to put a 5-up on it, and now even the mortal wounds aren't going to get it done. So I really do think that the Iron Warriors lists are going to dominate, are centered around that big unit of 10 Terminators. I did do a deep dive on the 10 Terminator unit, which I'll link in the description below if you want to check that out and check out the specifics on how that list works and how that unit operates. But needless to say, in an Iron Warriors Masterclass, I wouldn't be doing it a good service if I didn't mention how tough these Terminators are. All right, now that we've covered off all of the Iron Warriors specific stuff, let's have a look at some of the generic stuff that's really relevant in an Iron Warriors list. There's some Warlord Traits, some Relics, and some Stratagems that Iron Warriors players are going to want to know about and are going to want to lean on pretty heavily to do serious damage and do serious things on the tabletop. All right, so the first one is Hatred Incarnate. Each time this Warlord fights, if it made a charge move, performed a heroic intervention, add 1 to the strength and attacks characteristic of the Warlord, and each time this Warlord makes a melee attack, you can re-roll the attack's hit roll. Alright, now that doesn't sound too interesting on face value. It's just increasing the damage output of a character a little bit. Extra strength, extra attack, re-roll hits. Yeah, no, they are all really cool. However, this pairs really, really well with the Warp Smith, with the Mechatendril Relic. So you have this Warlord trait and that Relic, and now you're getting an additional attack, and you're getting to re-roll your hit rolls, and every successful hit just does a mortal wound. So now you're getting, I think it's up to 10 attacks that you're going to be hitting on 3s with rerolls, which is kind of like hitting on 2s, and you're able to buff that in various other ways, to make sure that this Iron Warrior's Warpsmith can just go in and go pew, and do a ton of mortal wounds. Just a mortal wound explosion. He's a hurricane. And yeah, so this is a generic Warlord trait available to every Legion, but it's one that Iron Warriors in particular get a lot of utility from. All right, next up we have the Gorget of Eternal Hate. Add 1 to the armor saving throws for the bearer. The bearer has a 4-up invulnerable save, and the first time the bearer is destroyed, before removing it from play, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches of the bearer. On a 2 to 5, that unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. On a 6, it suffers 3 mortal wounds. So this one is another thing that is a generic trait, a generic relic that you can give to anyone. However, Iron Warriors absolutely love it. You can put this on that same Disco Lord who has the Warlord trait for the 5-up feel no pain and the +1 toughness. So now he's going in with +1 toughness and +1 to his saving throws, and he's got a 4-up invulnerable save, and he's got the 5-up feel no pain. All baked into him. You don't need to roll any psychic powers, you don't need any prayers, you don't need to spend any command points. It's all baked into him, and he just runs around like a maniac, doing massive amounts of damage, being a pain in the ass, heroically intervening into things, and he's ridiculously hard to put down. This Gorget of Hate and Unyielding Metal, I believe the Warlord trait's called, is a really sick combo. Alrighty guys, that more or less rounds it out for the Iron Warriors Masterclass. We've talked about their Legion trait, we've talked about their secondary objective, we've talked about all of the Warlord traits, the relics, some of the different combos that you can create, and some of the different archetypes that you can build. In summary, I think most Iron Warriors lists are going to center around 2 of these 3 characters, probably not all 3, but 2 of these 3. It's either going to be a Lord Discordant with Unyielding Metal and the Gorget of Eternal Hate, and he goes in and is just a really self-sufficient, hard-to-kill unit that does a lot of damage. And then the other candidate is the Sorcerer in Terminator armor with the neg1 damage and the ability to regenerate wounds, and he's going to either teleport or move in advance and try to get into the center of the table fast so that he can do his warp ritual. And then the third character that I really like is the Warpsmith with the tendrils and the Hatred Eternal, so he goes in and does massive amounts of damage whilst buffing up all your vehicles and healing them throughout the game. They're the 3 characters that I think you want. You could take all 3, however, if you do so, you're going to have spent almost all of your command points at the start of the game, and that's going to really hinder your ability to leverage some of Iron Warrior's main power. Now, talking about main power, I think you're going to definitely want a unit of 10 Chaos Terminators buffed to the gills. You want a bunch of Power Fists, a bunch of Chain Fists, a bunch of Combi Melters in the unit, Mark of Slanesh on them, and the Black Rune of Damnation. And their goal is basically to move up into the center of the table, control it, dictate the flow of the game, and make it so that your opponent has a very hard time getting that hold more, because anywhere they go, they're going to be dealing with these Terminators, and they're going to really struggle to stop you from getting hold more, because they're going to really struggle to push you off that central objective. They're going to struggle to get past the Terminators in order to take your home objective, which means you've got 2 objectives locked down, and then all you need to do is spend the rest of your army fighting for that 3rd objective, and you're going to be getting hold more pretty consistently, pretty reliably. So that's the next part of the list. Then from there, we go into our various support elements. So I think you're going to want a bunch of Legionaries, so get your objective secured, or Chaos Cultists. Either way, you're going to want a few units of those, and then you're going to want to lean heavily into Demon Engines. A single Forge Fiend is always really good. He does the plasma weapons, and he gets a lot of utility out of Iron Warriors. You're also going to want some Decimators. Decimators are one of my all-time favorite Chaos Space Marine units. They're really, really powerful. Their ability to deal mortal wound damage downrange is really, really good. And also, you're probably going to want the standard Dark Apostle and Master of Possessions in that list as well, so that you can be buffing up your Terminators, you can be healing them, you can be giving them objective secured, you can be giving them trans hitman. There's lots of different stuff you can do with those characters. So I think every list is going to have Master of Possessions, Dark Apostle, and then either 1 or 2 of those other characters mentioned earlier, supporting a unit of 10 Terminators, and then the rest of the list is built around those various other elements. So that's where I see Iron Warriors lists going. I would love to hear your thoughts on Iron Warriors. If you would like to see one in action, I did a battle report with Boyd from Legends and Lore. He ran a very similar Iron Warriors list to what I'm talking about now. So if you want to check that out, I'll pop the link in the description below for that. And I would love to have a conversation with you in the comments below about what your thoughts are on the Iron Warriors. Do you think they have the legs to take it to a GT and win? I think they do in the right hands. And We're yet to see it happen, but I don't believe it's a foregone conclusion. I believe Iron Warriors definitely have the potential to win big. And yeah, as always, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, check out blogforthebloodgod.com. And over there you can get apparel like what I'm wearing now. You can pick up neoprene objective markers. We've got custom dice on the way. We've got all kinds of exciting stuff over on that website, as well as some tactics articles and various other things on the way. So that website is coming along great, and it's a great place where you can go to show your support. You can join our Patreon. You can enter the Discord community. There's all kinds of sick shit over on that website, so make sure to check it out. And as always, a huge thank you to everyone who likes, watches, subscribes to my videos, and everybody over on the Patreon. You guys make this possible. Couldn't do it without you, and I very much appreciate all of the support that I get, all of the comments. You guys are absolute legends, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.
Blog for the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable,